The room was silent. Commander Velith stared at the hollow interface. His eyes narrowed. His mouth curled into an expression of confusion and mild annoyance. The message had come in without warning, its frequency jamming any communication attempts from his command bridge. The message was human, and it wasn't one he was expecting. Commander Velith, the voice began, crisp and unsettlingly casual. You crossed the line, and you really should have known better. Velith's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary transmission. No urgent report. No military briefing. This was something else. A human, speaking to him as though they were equals. The gall of it. A figure materialized in the hologram. The figure of a man, an unremarkable man by imperial standards. He was dressed in a patched uniform, his face a mix of weariness and unshaken confidence. His eyes gleamed, and though his voice was calm, there was an unmistakable edge to it. It was a tone Velith had heard before in his subordinates, when they thought they could talk back without consequence. It usually ended poorly for them. You probably don't remember me, Commander, the human continued, with a light chuckle. Not that I expected you to, but I remember you. You were the one in charge during the siege of Sector 32. I have to admit, your strategy was efficient. You wiped out an entire colony. Impressive, really, for an empire that claims to value order. He paused for a beat, and Velith's fingers twitched as if he could reach through the hologram and strangle this insolent creature. But here's the thing, Velith. You didn't just destroy a colony. You wiped out my colony, the one that I grew up in. So yeah, I'm a little upset. Velith blinked, caught off guard. He couldn't place this man's face, but the accusation was clear. The human was claiming personal responsibility for the catastrophe that had shaken the Empire. That didn't sit well with Velith. He had ordered the destruction of countless colonies. A few million lives lost in the grand scheme of galactic conquest didn't matter, not to the Empire. But this felt different. You think I care about your personal vendetta? Velith spat, trying to regain control of the situation. His hand hovered over the control panel, ready to end the transmission and return to business as usual. This is the Empire. We do what needs to be done for the greater good. The human's face twisted into something that might have been amusement or disbelief. Greater good? Really? You've been reading too many propaganda pamphlets, Velith. Here's the thing. We don't care about your greater good. What we care about is justice. And what you've done, what your precious empire has done, is about to have consequences. Big ones. So sit tight. Velith's teeth ground together. He'd heard of humans rebelling, of small factions stirring trouble. But this was an entirely new kind of problem. The tone in the human's voice suggested they were not alone. There was something bigger here, something dangerous. Listen, human, Velith began, forcing his voice to remain steady. You've clearly made a mistake. You've crossed into our jurisdiction, and I will make sure that. But the human interrupted him, his voice suddenly growing darker. Oh, I haven't crossed anything, Commander. You see, while you've been busy thinking you can just walk all over us, we've been busy doing something else, something better. The hologram flickered briefly, as if the transmission was being overloaded with some unseen force. Velith felt his stomach tighten. He had no idea what was coming, but instinct told him it wouldn't be good. Not for him. Not for the Empire. You think you can control us? The human went on, a grin creeping into his voice. You really think a few ships and some orbital bombardments are enough to put humanity down? Well, I've got news for you, Commander. You've just lit the fuse. And we are about to show you exactly how bad of a mistake that was. Velith felt his spine stiffen. The arrogance in the human's words was infuriating, but it also carried an undeniable weight. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Something had changed. Something had clicked into place, and it didn't involve the Empire's well-oiled war machine. The human leaned in toward the camera, his expression shifting from smirking defiance to something much more chilling. Cold, calculated fury. You want to know what happens next, Velith? I'll tell you. The galaxy is about to find out that you don't get to wipe us out. Not this time. You've crossed the line, and now we're coming for you. The transmission abruptly ended, leaving Velith in the oppressive silence of his flagship's command room. His mind raced. He reached for his control panel, but the screen before him blinked erratically, as if mocking his attempt to regain control. He slammed his fist down on the table, cursing. This was no ordinary insurrection. The human had done something that had thrown the entire empire off balance, and Velith was left playing catch-up. "Sir," his chief strategist said nervously, his reptilian eyes wide. "We've lost contact with several key fleets in the sector. Transmission interference, it's spreading. It's almost like someone hacked into our systems." Velith stood, pacing. He had always prided himself on the precision of his plans, the unfaltering certainty with which the Empire had dominated. But this was chaos in a way he hadn't anticipated. And it was all centered on a single human voice. "They found a way to reach us," Velith murmured, more to himself than anyone else in the room. "And they've already started. We've been too complacent. Shall we prepare for full-scale retaliation, Commander?" his strategist asked. Velith hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His fingers hovered over the command controls, but the uncertainty lingered. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another rebellion. It was a declaration of war, not against the Empire, but against the very idea of imperial dominance. "Retaliation?" Velith echoed, his voice thick with bitterness. "No, they've already won that battle. Now we're in their game." And in the quiet that followed, as Velith stared into the flickering hologram where the human had once been, he understood. The war had already begun. The quiet hum of the command bridge was shattered by a sudden, urgent chime. Commander Velith's fingers trembled as they hovered over the controls, trying to suppress the unease gnawing at him. The human's words echoed in his mind. "You've crossed the line." Whatever had been triggered by that warning, it was happening now. "Sir," came the voice of his tactical officer, a quick, sharp sound that sliced through the tension. "We've just received reports of anomalies across multiple sectors. Ships disappearing, entire fleets going dark." Velith's lips twisted into a scowl. "This is a joke, right?" He glanced over to his chief strategist, a lizard-like figure whose entire race had earned a reputation for impeccable calculation. The strategist's wide eyes gave him no reassurance. "Explain yourself, Lieutenant. It's not just one fleet, Commander. We're losing signals across the board. It's like something's intercepting our communications, not just scrambling them, erasing them." The officer's hands flew over the console, sweat beginning to bead on his brow. "And there's something else, an unknown signal, but it's not from any of our ships." Velith stood up sharply, the tension in his back now a tight coil. "That's impossible. We control the communication channels." The officer shook his head, his voice rising in panic. "Not anymore, sir. It's like someone hijacked our entire network." Velith's mind raced. The human. That damned message. Could it be true? Was the Empire, with all its might, now helpless against this unexpected force? He felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck, the reality setting in that they were not the ones in control anymore. Across the bridge, the screen flickered, then blinked to life. Velith froze, his blood running cold as he saw the familiar face again, the human from the transmission. The same confident smile, the same unsettling calm. "Hello, Commander Velith." The human's voice sounded so casual, it could have been a phone call from a colleague, not a declaration of war. "I hope you're not too surprised by the, let's call it, situation you're experiencing right now. But I did say you'd be in for a surprise, didn't I?" Velith clenched his jaw so tightly he thought his teeth might crack. The nerve of this human, the audacity. "You've messed with the wrong empire, human," Velith growled, though his voice faltered just slightly, betraying his rising panic. "What have you done?" "Oh, I haven't done anything, Velith," the human replied breezily, his eyes gleaming with that maddening, infuriating confidence. "But you did. You made the mistake of thinking that just because you have a fleet and because you have weapons, you could do whatever you wanted. You thought you could burn down human colonies, wipe out whole populations, and that would be the end of it. Well, my friend, you couldn't have been more wrong." The human smile turned into something darker, more dangerous. "You see, we've been preparing for this moment for quite a while. You might have noticed a few things slipping through your fingers already. Ships gone missing. Data corrupted. Communications lost. That's all us, Commander. All human ingenuity. Velith's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't some lucky break. This was planned, calculated. And if there was one thing Velith knew, it was that humans, when backed into a corner, could be disturbingly clever. Too clever. You think you can fight back against the Empire? Velith spat, trying to regain his composure, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. You're nothing. You're weak. I'll have you all hunted down and executed. The human chuckled, a low, disarming sound. Oh, I'm not worried about that. You see, the problem with your empire, Velith, is that you've never had to actually fight for anything. Everything you have, you've taken by force. But there's one thing you never accounted for. Human determination. The words hung in the air like a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down at the feet of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. And in that moment, Velith understood. This wasn't just about a colony. It wasn't even just about the Empire's unchecked tyranny. No, this was personal. The human wasn't trying to take back a single colony or extract revenge for a few lives lost. This was an all-out assault on everything Velith's empire stood for. The human's face remained unchanged, like a puppet master enjoying the first signs of panic in his opponent. And here's the fun part, Commander. While you're scrambling to figure out where your ships are, we've already taken over your primary defense systems. Your fleets? Gone. Your communications? Gone. And as for your precious warships, well, let's just say I hope you've been keeping up with your maintenance. Velith's eyes widened in horror. What are you talking about? The human leaned forward slightly, his grin widening, satisfaction dripping from every syllable. I'm talking about the fact that every ship in your fleet is now inoperative. Every single one of your war machines is useless. Because we've done something you could never imagine, Velith. We've hacked your technology. The cold realization hit Velith like a blow to the chest. It was one thing to face a rebellion. Those could be crushed with overwhelming force. It was another thing entirely to face a foe who knew the Empire's systems inside and out, who had the cunning to infiltrate and disable them from the inside. Humanity had just turned the Empire's greatest strength into its most glaring weakness. Your arrogance, the human continued, eyes gleaming, was your downfall. You thought your empire was invincible. And now, Commander Velith, we're here to teach you exactly how wrong you were. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Velith's mind reeled. His entire command, his fleets, his warships, rendered useless by the very species he had underestimated for so long. This was no longer about empire building. This was about survival. He took a deep breath, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Get me a direct line to the Imperial Council," Velith commanded, his voice steady, though the weight of his words was heavy with the realization that everything he had worked for was slipping away. "We have a new enemy now, and this time, we're not the ones calling the shots." His strategist was already typing at his console, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The Empire had just made its gravest mistake, and there would be no going back. The Empire had always been a symbol of invincibility, a sprawling machine that crushed opposition beneath its weight without breaking a sweat. Commander Velith had believed in that invincibility with every fiber of his being. He had spent years commanding fleets, sending planets into submission, and watching as the galaxy bent to the Empire's will. Nothing could touch them, or so he had thought. But now, standing on the bridge of the flagship, Velith could feel the unmistakable tremor of panic settling in. It was almost imperceptible at first, like the distant rumble of thunder before a storm. But it was there. The systems were failing. The comms were down. The fleet was in disarray. Someone was attacking the very heart of the Empire. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice edged with concern, "we're receiving an unauthorized transmission. It's not from any of our fleets." Velith's brow furrowed. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, and there, for the first time in his career, Velith saw something he wasn't prepared for, a human. A young man, no older than 25, wearing what appeared to be a standard military uniform, but not one Velith had ever seen before. The human smiled, and Velith's blood ran cold. There was an unsettling calm in the young man's expression, an arrogance that made Velith's skin crawl. "Commander Velith," the human said, his voice oozing with mock politeness. "You're probably wondering how this is possible. How a bunch of humans, the same ones you've been stepping on for centuries, could bring your precious empire to its knees. Well, it's quite simple, really." Velith's mind raced, trying to piece together what had just been said. The fleet was under attack by humans, but how? They were nothing compared to the Empire's might. The human continued, ignoring the stunned silence on the other end. "You see, Velith," the human went on, leaning casually against what looked like a wall. "You made a mistake. And that mistake, well, it's going to cost you. You assumed that because you had the biggest guns, the most ships, and the most planets under your thumb, that you could just erase us. Erase us from the galaxy. That's what you did, right? You didn't even think we could fight back." Velith's eyes narrowed. "You think you've won?" His voice was colder than he intended, but he could feel the uncertainty rising like a tide. This wasn't a message. This wasn't some attempt to broker peace or offer surrender. No, this was something far more dangerous. A declaration. "One," the human replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not yet. But we're getting there. And here's where you really screwed up. You underestimated us. You thought we were weak. You thought we were just a bunch of squishy creatures who could be wiped off the map without a second thought. But that's where you failed. You didn't see the rage building. And now, well, let's just say the Empire's gravest mistake wasn't just attacking us. It was thinking we'd just sit back and let you." Velith felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just that they were attacking. It was the arrogance in the human's tone. They weren't afraid. They weren't even trying to bargain. The human was relishing the moment. "You've lost, Velith," the human said, almost sing-song. "You just don't know it yet." A cold laugh bubbled up in Velith's throat, and he immediately hated himself for it. There was something undeniably unsettling about this situation. The human was right in one aspect. They had always underestimated the humans. They had been nothing but an afterthought, the remnants of a dying species clinging to their insignificant corners of the galaxy. But this was something else entirely. They had managed to breach the very core of the Empire. They had taken down its defenses without firing a shot. "You think a few words will stop us?" Velith snapped, more to convince himself than anything else. "The Empire is a force like no other. You're nothing compared to us." The human's grin widened. "You're right about one thing, Velith. The Empire is a force, a dying force, and we are the ones who will ensure that you stay dead. You've made your own grave, and now we're just going to watch you fall in it." Velith's fingers tightened on the edge of his console, but the words felt hollow. The comm system had gone silent, and the human had vanished from the screen as quickly as he had appeared. The bridge was quiet now, eerily so. The familiar hum of the ship's systems had faltered. The crew around him shifted uneasily, casting glances back at Velith as though waiting for instructions. But even he knew there were no clear orders to give anymore. His mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what had just transpired. This wasn't a typical rebellion. It wasn't some scattered group of insurgents trying to throw off the shackles of the Empire. No, this was something far more calculated. These humans had planned this. They had known the Empire's weaknesses. They had studied it for years, biding their time. And now, they had struck when the Empire was at its most vulnerable. "What's our status?" Velith demanded, his voice tight. The communications officer hesitated. "Sir, we're still receiving interference. We've lost contact with several key fleets. The central network is completely down." The words were a slap in the face. The Empire's greatest asset, their unrelenting power, had been brought to its knees by a group of humans who should have been no more than a minor inconvenience. The systems that had held the galaxy together for centuries were crumbling, and it was clear now that the Empire had never seen this coming. Velith turned to face the view outside the bridge, staring out at the cold expanse of space. The stars, once his Empire's dominion, now seemed distant and uncaring. The vastness of space had always been his domain, his canvas. But now, it was a reminder of how small they had all become, how easily everything had been ripped from their grasp. "We're going to make them regret this," Velith muttered under his breath. But even as he said it, the certainty in his words began to falter. The human's voice echoed in his mind, chilling him to the bone. You've lost. It was the truth, and Velith knew it. The Empire's flagship was floating aimlessly in the void, its once pristine hull now a tarnished relic of what it had been. Commander Velith stood at the helm, his back stiff as a board, his eyes locked on the holoscreen displaying the Empire's rapidly dwindling assets. It was like watching a sinking ship in slow motion, except this time, he was the captain, and the ship was going down faster than anyone had predicted. What's our status? He demanded, though he already knew the answer. The lights had dimmed, and the low hum of the ship's systems was all but gone. It felt as though the ship itself was mourning the inevitable. Sir, his chief strategist replied, his voice strained, we've lost contact with every fleet in our sector. Our communication systems are still down, and we can't even access the most basic of our weapons. We're flying blind. Velith's fingers curled into tight fists at his sides. This is impossible, he muttered under his breath. We're the Empire. No one does this to us. Well, sir, his tactical officer said cautiously, we might have underestimated them. The words hung in the air for a moment before they seemed to settle like a weight in Velith's chest. He turned to face the officer, his gaze cold. Do not say that again. His strategist shifted uneasily, but the officer wasn't wrong. This wasn't just a rebellion. This wasn't a typical band of insurgents with a handful of stolen ships. This was something else entirely. The humans had somehow disabled the Empire's entire military network, leaving them completely exposed. As if on cue, the comm system buzzed to life, a sharp crackle followed by a voice that made Velith's blood run cold. Commander Velith, the human voice chimed, smooth and mocking, like a friendly neighbor who just dropped by to remind you of an unpleasant truth. You've done something few have ever managed to do. You've pissed off an entire species. And you didn't even have the decency to do it properly. Velith's heart skipped a beat. It was him, the human from before, the one who had started all this. Not that we're complaining, the voice continued, oozing insincerity. In fact, we're kind of grateful. It's not every day that we get to send a clear message across the galaxy. You see, Velith, the problem is that you're too arrogant. You thought you could invade, conquer, and erase us. But you missed one small detail. Velith's mouth was dry as the words rang out across the bridge, each one cutting deeper than the last. And what's that? He asked, his voice flat, as though saying the words aloud might somehow make them less true. The human's voice returned, casual as ever. You forgot we're human. There was a pause, and then the sound of something cracking, followed by a low chuckle. We don't take well to being erased. We don't just roll over and accept it. We fight back. We fight dirty, too. Velith's fist clenched again, but this time he didn't care. You've won the initial round, human, he said, his tone icy. But don't mistake that for victory. I'll make you regret this. Oh, I'm sure you will, the human replied, his voice light. But here's the thing, Commander. It's not just about revenge anymore. This is about revolution. And let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot more fun than simply defeating you. It's about taking everything you thought you knew about power and watching it burn. A cold shiver ran down Velith's spine. The human was right. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a war for their very way of life. They had done something no one, not even the most ambitious rebel faction, had ever managed before. They had shaken the Empire's foundation. Do you want to know what's coming next? The human asked, a little too cheerfully. I'll tell you, humanity has had enough. No more sitting idly by. No more being subjugated. This war, it's not just about fighting back. It's about making a statement. The screen flickered, showing an image of the Empire's once glorious fleets, now reduced to floating carcasses in space. Their once pristine designs crumpled and deformed. The human's voice took on a darker tone. Your pride was your downfall, Velith. You thought you could crush us like insects. But what you failed to understand is that we are everywhere. Every corner of the galaxy, every hidden base, every forgotten alley. We've been there, and we've been waiting. Velith's breath caught in his throat. They couldn't be serious. The sheer scope of the human operation was beyond anything he had prepared for. How had they been so thorough, so patient? And why had he not seen it coming? We've spent years infiltrating your systems, learning your weaknesses, the human continued, voice now carrying the weight of decades of quiet fury. And we knew that one day, someone like you would come along. Someone who would think that they could squash us without consequence. You've made the mistake of thinking that we're just people to be controlled. But let me make this crystal clear. We're a force, a rage, and you're about to experience it in full. Velith opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He was powerless. The Empire, his empire, the force that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, was being systematically dismantled before his very eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The human's voice broke through his thoughts once more, now with a finality that sent a chill down his spine. This is just the beginning, Velith. We are everywhere, and we're bringing the fight to you. And, just so you know, we've learned your tricks. We've learned them well. No more hiding behind your fleets. No more hiding behind your weapons. This time, the galaxy fights back. With that, the transmission cut out, and the silence that followed was deafening. The bridge, once a place of authority and dominance, now felt like a tomb. The gravity of the situation finally settled in Velith's chest like an iron weight. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was the end of an era. And it was the humans, in all their unpredictable, unrelenting fury, who had brought it to its knees. Velith turned toward his officers, his face pale and taut. "Prepare for impact," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We're no longer the hunters. We are the prey." And with that, the final echoes of the Empire began to fade into the darkness, leaving only the wrath of humanity in its wake. The view from the bridge was nothing short of a nightmare. The stars outside, once so beautiful, now appeared like cold, indifferent witnesses to the end of something vast and powerful. Commander Velith stood at the helm of the flagship, his hands clenched tightly around the controls, but nothing could control the sinking feeling in his chest. He had been the Empire's iron fist, he had been power, and now he was a bystander in a slow-motion collapse. "Sir, we've received a transmission," his comm officer said, her voice uncharacteristically faint. Velith turned sharply. "What now?" His words came out harder than he intended, but there was no hiding the panic that churned beneath his usually composed exterior. The comm officer hesitated before pressing a button. The screen flickered, then stabilized, and there, as always, was the human. The same mocking grin, the same confident calm. "Commander Velith." The human's voice came through, and for the first time, there was no pretense of friendliness, no glint of playful superiority. It was cold. It was final. "I trust you're enjoying the view of what's left of your empire." Velith's breath caught in his throat. "What have you done?" he spat, each word a bitter realization that they had crossed a point of no return. "Oh, we've done quite a bit, Velith," the human replied. "We've dismantled your fleets, taken down your communication networks, and even erased the data that holds the very foundation of your rule. But it's not just about that. It's about the symbolism." The word struck Velith like a blow. Symbolism. He understood now. This wasn't just about the Empire's power. It was about crushing everything it stood for, everything it had ever believed in. And the human, with his calm, collected demeanor, was the one orchestrating its fall. "You think you've won?" Velith snarled, trying to claw back any semblance of control. "You've only delayed the inevitable. The Empire will rise again. We'll rebuild. We will rebuild." The human's laugh interrupted him, loud and mocking. "You can't rebuild what's already gone. You think we don't know how this works? We've studied you. We've been watching you for centuries. You've been too busy destroying everything in your path to notice the seeds we were planting." Velith's face twisted in disbelief. "You've been planning this for centuries?" "Centuries, decades, millennia, it doesn't matter. You were always going to fall. The moment you chose to crush us beneath your heel, you signed your own death warrant. You just didn't know it yet." The human paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "And now, Velith, the bills come due. Your species won't stand a chance," Velith muttered, though even as he said it, a cold sweat began to bead on his brow. The power in his voice was fading, replaced by doubt. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, the human responded, his grin returning, though there was no warmth in it. We've already stood, and now it's your turn to fall. Your arrogance has cost you everything. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room thick with the aftermath of those words. Silence engulfed the bridge, but the weight of Velith's growing realization smothered everything. The empire, his pride, his purpose was crumbling, and there was no escaping it. The tactical officer, a young alien who had been with Velith for nearly a decade, spoke up hesitantly. Sir, the fleet is gone, completely gone. Every last one. We've lost everything. Velith couldn't bring himself to speak at first. He had trained for this moment, trained for the unexpected, for every contingency. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for a force that could tear down everything he had worked for without firing a single shot. He turned slowly toward the officer. We're not done yet. Gather what's left of our resources. We might not have ships, but we have other means. His voice was low, almost to himself, but he was already thinking ahead. There had to be something they could use, some weapon they hadn't thought of, some leverage he could use to claw back what had been taken from them. The officer nodded and began to relay the orders, but Velith's mind was elsewhere. He had once been a conqueror, a master of the stars. Now, he was an emperor without an empire, a soldier without an army. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the human's words. Asterisk, you're not rebuilding anything, star. A comm beeped, and Velith turned toward it, steeling himself for more bad news. Instead, the screen flickered to life, showing an image he wasn't prepared for, a live broadcast across all remaining Empire networks. His heart froze. On the screen was a simple message, the end of an empire. It was human, but it wasn't just the message. It was the confidence, the certainty in the human's voice that made Velith's blood run cold. The Empire, the voice declared, was a cancer on the galaxy. It grew and spread, consuming everything in its path. But no more. The time for oppression has passed. The time for freedom is here. The Empire is over. And we're just getting started. Velith's fist struck the console, the metal denting under the force of his anger. This can't be happening, he muttered to himself. This can't be the end. But deep down, he knew it was. The human had won. The galaxy had finally found its voice, and the Empire had become nothing more than a relic of a brutal past. As the broadcast ended, Velith looked out into the void once more. The stars didn't seem as cold now, but they were a reminder of everything that had been lost. And with that, the last flicker of the Empire's greatness snuffed out, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. But in the far reaches of space, humanity's wrath was just beginning to burn brighter. And Velith, no matter how hard he tried, could not outrun the fact that his empire had come to an end.